Facebook is reportedly planning to change how it handles speech from politicians on the platform. And just then this morning, Facebook has banned former President Donald Trump's account for 2 years following its finding that he stoked violence ahead of the deadly January 6th insurrection. For more insight on all this, we're joined by Sherr, Cnet editor-at-large. Ian, last time you and I spoke, we were talking about how, Facebook, they had to come up with a decision. It couldn't just be an indefinite kind of statement on their part. The president is now banned for 2 years. Facebook is also changing the way that they handle statements from politicians, kind of treating them the same way as, let's say, if you and I were to post something on Facebook. What are your thoughts on that modification to the way they handle content?
I mean, I think it's a long time coming. One of the biggest complaints that I've had, and I've written about on Cnet, is that Facebook's way that they police their platform is completely inconsistent. They treat world leaders very differently from you and me, and they hold them to a lower standard than the rest of us, right? They're allowed to harass and to threaten lives and to do all sorts of stuff. It's not just Facebook. Twitter's allowed this, YouTube has allowed this. It's beyond ridiculous. And so now the fact that they're going to start to actually say, look, everyone on our platform has to follow the same rules is the first step toward making sure that we are able to hold people accountable for what happens on what is one of the largest megaphones on the planet.
I do agree with you in that all content should be treated equally. Not to say that people that have larger platforms should be censored. That's not what I'm saying at all. But to some degree, if someone like a politician or someone that has a very, very widespread public platform is posting certain things, their reach is further than, again, someone like myself or just, someone, a regular Joe out in the world. Their reach is obviously wider and more expansive. So what they write out there could also be potentially more dangerous versus someone who just writes something who, is just a random person out in the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think January 6th taught us one very important thing, which is this is not just mouthing off on the internet. This stuff has real implications. It's life and death. And while it was really easy just to kind of criticize Facebook and Mark Zuckerberg as this unelected 30-something white guy who doesn't really understand the entire breadth of the platform that he's running, we are way beyond that. We are at a point now where we are talking about threats to democracy. We are talking about people's safety. We have seen that Facebook, in particular, the United Nations did a study of the ethnic cleansing that happened in Myanmar and said that a couple of years ago when that happened, Facebook and other social networks played a determining role in that ethnic cleansing. That is horrific. And so taking this stuff way more seriously, dealing with what has become a massive problem is very important. And what I hope will happen is that the next step here will be to actually start setting out precedents and essentially a legal system or some sort of legal theory that we can start running the internet on. Because it's very clear that the Wild West approach has caused untold amounts of damage.
Absolutely. Now, I'm not sure how these companies like Twitter and Facebook and all that have handle these kind of things. I don't know if certain words trigger a flag on the website or if there's actually bodies going through and kind of reading these posts and determining what is and what isn't allowed. Do you know how that works?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's a mixture of all the worst ways they could handle this. What they do is that they rely on you and me, first and foremost, to identify bad behavior. As you may expect, a lot of people who are making the worst things on the internet are often doing this in secret groups. They're doing it with their friends, and they're not likely to be identified and warned to Facebook. So these things already get out of control way before they even are aware of it. But on top of that, they do try to at least somehow manage the platform. They do, for example, look for consistent links from known websites that are problematic. They do have programs that automatically trawl through Facebook looking for child exploitation and images that are connected to terrorism. Those are the two things that Facebook and Twitter and YouTube have gotten pretty okay at handling. But everything else they are very bad at because they're running up against this whole issue that we deal with as a society, which is the question of free expression and how far it should go. Here in the United States, we have the First Amendment, but that only stops governments from affecting the way that we speak. It says nothing about Facebook. And the reality is that Facebook has already made a decision it's not going to follow the First Amendment. It takes down terrorist content. So the next step is, how far does it go? And at this point, they've set a new line. They've said that the threat to public safety that President Trump created on January 6th and persistently it represents after that is too much for that platform, at least in the next 2 years. That is a monumental decision.
It absolutely is. I know a lot of people don't like the idea. A lot of people just don't like Mark Zuckerberg to begin with. But I know a lot of people also don't like the idea of placing the decisions on things like this in the hands of those very wealthy in the tech world. Do you think that this could lead to some scrutiny or some issues by some of those people? At the end of the day, in the 4 years that Trump was in office, his tweets were the basis for a lot of news coverage. Do you think that it could potentially be concerning to some degree, saying that, you know, the what becomes newsworthy is in the hands of these tech giants and these millionaires and and the Mark Zuckerbergs of the world and all of those people? Do you think that's concerning to some degree, that they may be controlling the news cycle?
I mean, on part of me says it's not that big a deal because, you know, the bully pulpit of the White House is big enough as it is. But the reality is that we have learned, watching President Trump being banned from these platforms, that actually it's rather amazing how impactful his tweets and Facebook posts were. They really did drive news cycles. And so the question becomes, how much power should people like Mark Zuckerberg have to make these kind of decisions? To his credit, Mark Zuckerberg doesn't want to be the arbiter of truth of the universe, and neither do we want him to be. But someone has to manage the bad behavior on these networks. That's why, for example, at Cnet, I've actually advocated for forcing these companies to have standards by which they actually manage these platforms and to spell out how they treat everybody on these platforms, not just letting world leaders get an automatic pass because they're world leaders. And I think that that's important. Right now, we've got a very large contingent of the political world believing that Silicon Valley has it out for them. There's a best-selling book from Josh Hawley, the senator from Missouri, who is making a very large case that big tech is trying to control us. And whether or not you believe that, it's very clear that this has become a big problem. And part of that is because of the lack of transparency from Silicon Valley that's allowing these behaviors to exist.
Absolutely. Changes like this, are they something that can happen overnight, or do they have to be implemented over a period of time with Facebook?
Just like any good government, it is messy and it takes a while. One thing I think that's been very key is that Facebook did the first step over a year ago when it announced that it was going to have this, what I like to call Supreme Court of Facebook, right? This oversight board that people can appeal to, that is run by, that's made up of a bunch of journalists and free speech experts and lawyers and all of that stuff who are not on Facebook's payroll. And they were the ones who forced Facebook and said, you've got to actually come up with a rule, not just say Trump is special and he's indefinitely suspended from the platform. That's what caused today to happen. I think it's the first step. The next steps are to follow very similar paths that we have done in the real world, right? Come up with rules that we all can agree on. Allow we the people to have some control over it and get our buy-in so that we all feel that this is fair. And that is probably the most most important part, and also going to be the hardest part.
And as you mentioned, it's been a long time coming, and unfortunately, had these actions been taken before January 6th, January 6th wouldn't have happened. But January 6th is obviously the catalyst behind all of this. So while we hope it would have happened earlier, we wish it would have happened earlier, we're just happy that some changes are being made, and we are going to see those changes happening over, over some time right now. So better late than never, right?
One hopes, right? I definitely hope that this is the start of a very good chapter on the internet's life, but it's going to take a long time to get this stuff right.
Absolutely. Well, Ian Sherr with Cnet, we appreciate you joining us. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me.